Another assembly and NuGet package in our application is Microsoft.ASP.NET.Identity.EntityFramework. This assembly provides concrete types that implement the interfaces we saw in the core assembly in the last slide. For example, there is an identity user that implements iUser and also includes additional fields that make it possible to store a password hash and associated third-party logins. The identity role implements iRole, and those two classes are entities because, as the name of this assembly implies, the assembly has a dependency on the entity framework and is going to use the entity framework to communicate with SQL Server and persist user information. So there, for example, is a user store class, which is shown collapsed here because it actually contains a couple dozen methods, because that user store class implements iUser store, iUser password store, iUser login store. It implements all those repository type of interfaces. And if you're happy using SQL Server with the entity framework, this is the class that you want to instantiate and give to the user manager. Remember, it's the user manager that provides the domain logic. This user store is really just about putting information into the entity framework. So when a user store is created, it will need an entity framework data context, and this assembly already defines one that you'll want to use or possibly inherit from, and that is the identity DB context. It knows how to store roles and users, and those don't have to be restricted to identity user, because you can specify the type of user that you want to store with the generic type argument, but ultimately the generic constraint on that argument forces your user class to be an identity user or something that is derived from entity user. So all your users will have username, ID, claims, and logins. And this DB context includes some mapping code to make sure that all the tables are properly created in the database. So Microsoft.ASP.NET.Identity.EntityFramework, that represents one implementation of the identity abstractions that were defined in that core assembly, and it has some flexibility. The ultimate flexibility would be implementing your own classes from those interfaces in core. But let's take a look and see how these classes, user store and identity DB context, work in this existing MVC application.